Okay, now the question and answer portion. Any questions? I typically find that people they don't even know how to formulate a question based on the information, you know? It's a whole new perspective of the world, and so to ask you to ask a question immediately after knocking you over is kind of an imposition, I know, but
so
try.
I know, here's one that I don't wonder, but I know a lot of people, it's a fad right now, I can't even triumpha, or the current blood moons on the holy days.
Again, I fall back on what Joseph Smith was told by the Savior. They are an abomination. This, as near as I can tell, this blood moon thing traces back to, was it Hagee?
Who? No, he's just the one preacher that talks a lot about it.
He talks a lot about it.
But Gordon Hinckley actually said that prophecy was fulfilled when he did that in 2001. So,
yeah.
So all these are still happening. They're not what he talked about as being fulfilled already.
I think President Hinckley was talking about a spiritual fulfillment anyway. So that's a moot point in my mind. But then, anyway, that's what I fall back on.
Yeah, on your explanation how the moon's going to turn red because it's going to get hot and going to glow. Like like an ash.
It's
it
very
pretty much, kind of gives the answer. But I know it's a fad right now, so I figured just make it clear for people.
Did I?
I think so.
Okay.
But you didn't specifically address that in the lecture, so.
Okay, I didn't. No, we did now though.
Yeah.
There was another question.
I'm just curious how you got started on this path. What's your life story?
You want another one of my stories? My wife's over there grinning ear to ear. She's heard these stories so many times, she don't not another story.
But the real story is he fell from a high place and cracked his head open. He really did. And came back from it. And then
I sure appreciate that support, sweetheart. Thank you very much. My story, I guess, probably starts, I've written about this. Back when I was in primary, I attended the first ward in Salt Lake. It was literally called the first ward because it was the first ward constituted by the pioneers after they arrived in Salt Lake Valley, with divisions of ward boundaries and things. By the time I came along in the 40s or the early 50s, the first ward chapel was located on 8th East between 7th and 8th South, right next to what is now the Park Stake Center. It's been demolished. Next door was Hamilton School, and I was a grade schooler, and in those days, primary was on Tuesdays, I believe, or Wednesdays, I'm not sure. And as soon as school was out, we ran out of the front door and onto the playground. You could always hear somebody over in the chapel next door ringing this big brass bell they had. It was one of those handbells like you see them using in the tabernacle now. The first kid through the door at primary got to ring the bell. I always wanted to do that. I could never get out of class in time to get over there and ring that bell. But I went over to primary one day, and the teacher was giving a lesson, and she said, in the Bible, there are men known as prophets. And those men were granted a vision of the future, and they recorded what they saw and things that are going to happen in our day. Little Anthony Larson ran home and opened Revelation and tried to read it. That's primary age, so that's where it started. I read everything I could get my hands on, Skousen, McConkie. Even in my mission, I read Crowther's book, Prophecy, Key to the Future. Came away unsatisfied. Didn't know there was anything more. All I knew is that I couldn't understand it. When I read Velikovsky and went through the story that I've told you here about discovering the similarity between the agent that Velikovsky named for the Exodus with the description that Joseph Smith gave of the agent of the last days, that was the defining moment From that moment on, I realized that the scriptures were filled with metaphors. That what I was looking at in John's revelation, or Ezekiel's vision, or Daniel's vision, or the vision of the tree of life in the Book of Mormon, were metaphors, parables. And all I had to do was discover the historical basis of all of those metaphors, and they all lead back to one thing, and that is the ancient heavens. And of course, I since discovered that the watershed, forgive the pun, in history was Noah's flood. Before Noah's flood, and this is something I point out in the book, and I probably ought to mention it here. What did I do? What I probably ought to do is, you got all this, so let me erase it. Even naive gets knocked out here. Because I feel like no one has to be naive anymore. Every Latter-day Saint, you don't have to be a prophet, you don't have to be a visionary, you just have to do a little homework. A lot of homework, let's be honest. And you can read prophecy. God didn't put that stuff there in code so that we had to struggle to work it out. The language the prophets were using was plain language in their day. It's not plain to us because we don't share the same tradition. We don't attach the same meaning to those words, you see. So where was I going with this?
The flood.
Before the flood. This is what Peter, 2 Peter chapter 3, I believe. That's the key. Peter, in one of his letters, swerves out off the discourse. He talks about how designing men in the last days are going to teach the world a bunch of lies and people are going to be ignorant. And then he goes into a history lesson. And he says, before the flood, we had one heaven and one earth. And in the flood, that heaven and earth perished. And we were giving the heaven and earth that we have now. And that the heaven and earth that we have now is preserved against the events of the last days that will give us yet another new heaven and a new earth. That's the key concept. The myth that you've been taught of the evolution of our earth and our solar system is wrong. Not only did the prophets teach it, all ancient cultures that witnessed this change at the time of the flood have their stories about it. To us, it sounds like mythology. We label it mythology. The word myth has come to mean falsehood. It's not. It's history. Myths are history. The scriptures are history. And that's what Peter was trying to say in chapter 3. He says, yeah, the world's changed. The heavens we see now are not the heavens. So you come down to Joseph Smith, and he draws a picture for Philo Dibble. Says, here's what the ancient heavens used to look like. And modern scholars look at that and they say, what was Joseph smoking that day? We've never seen anything like this. And even the people that Joseph taught it to, Philo Dibble, Eliza R. Young, a dozen of other of his close associates, they said, oh, this is about the city of Enoch and the cities, the lost tribes, and they were taken away on other orbs. And there's none of that in Joseph Smith's drawing. You let the drawing speak for itself. Maybe I'm getting too into this, but it shows 3 planets that would have appeared in the ancient skies, Earth's skies. Earth isn't pictured. He doesn't label any of these bodies. Philo Dibble does. He says, well, the middle one was the Earth, and the top one was where the lost tribes were, and the bottom was where the city of Enoch was. But Joseph didn't do that. So I prefer to let Joseph speak for himself, because early Latter-day Saints didn't understand this any better than most of us do today. So he didn't label the Earth. Why? Because the Earth was down here. And when they looked up, they saw these 3 planets, and it created an image something like this: nested planets. Near the Earth. So close you could almost reach out and touch them. 2 discourses of early Latter-day Saints said, Joseph taught us that's the reason they built the Tower of Babel, because they thought they could reach heaven or the city of Zion or the city of God. It was that close that it seemed feasible. General authorities said this. Modern LDS scholars look at that and they go, somebody had been smoking something. No. Modern cosmologists, granted, there are only a few modern comparative mythologists and cosmologists say, yeah, this is what they saw in the heavens. This was the eye of God. The eyeball, the iris, and the pupil. That's where such metaphors as having your eye single to the glory of God comes from. The apple of his father's eye, the apple that Eve ate in the garden, symbolism based on this stuff. I know that's a long answer to a short question, but that's my story.
One thing that might be a little helpful is to show how, pick one of your favorite myths and show how it fits into the story.
One of my favorite myths?
Because
I know.
I see a lot of it, but
I know the one that's interesting. Well, yeah, I think that's a good observation.
What was the Cyclops name?
Yeah, that's where the image of this was the eye in the forehead of God. That's where the Cyclops business comes from. He's shaking his head.
No, I'll talk to you later.
It happens. No, I understand. I've been there and done it. At one point, the planets looked like this. Mars was.
Well, put the crescent.
What's that?
Put the crescent.
Well, the crescent isn't important here. You're gonna. You said pick my favorite story.
Sorry. Sorry.
His story.
Saturn, Venus, Mars. Okay, and this business is the same thing that Joseph illustrated here. These spiritual connections, the early Latter-day Saints called them, or they called them narrow necks of land. All trying to understand what Joseph was describing here, what he was trying to present. They're plasmas. These planets were strung along a line, Earth being down here, and it's of course not the scale. But these plasmas erupted. Plasmas, I've talked about it in previous lessons, electrified, ionized atoms, particles that could luminesce and glow. And they looked like rivers and serpents and you name it. In this case, and this is what Joseph Smith is drawing here, these planets all shared an axis of rotation. They're lined up pole to pole, north, south, south, north, south, and the same with the earth down here, north and south. That's what Joseph drew. That's what his illustration says, not what Dibble said. And when they moved out of their orbits and Mars approached the earth, he grew large. And this great pillar appeared on the horizon of the earth. And that's what the thing looked like. Ryan's busy creating some animations. If you want to go on Facebook and join our group, you can see some of the work he's doing. Now, to answer your question, right? My favorite is called Jack and Jill. A simple child's nursery rhyme based on a real event that happened in the ancient heaven. Jack is Mars. Jill is Venus. Jack and Jill, and this is the celestial mountain, the hill, the pillar that supported the city of heaven. That's where they came up with the idea of Zion has fled. Not the city, the planet called Zion. Anyway, Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Why water? Because the plasma looked like flowing water. Remember the tree of life story that Lehi and Nephi have in the Book of Mormon? There's the river running alongside the path to the tree of life. This is the tree of life. And of course, Steve mentioned the crescent on there with its branches that were white and delightsome. You see, beautiful to see. Anyway, they ran up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down, and of course Mars did descend and broke his crown. One of the interesting images between Mars and Venus in antiquity was, I'm going to do a poor job of drawing this, but no, that's not right. Let's try again. Looks like a bowling ball.
Bowling pin.
Bowling pin, I'm sorry. Looks like a bowling pin. Mars here, Venus here, and Saturn way up here somewhere. This is the Egyptian white crown. So, Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after when the polar configuration came apart. If you think that's ludicrous, look at every one of the children's fairy tales. Rapunzel in a tower, confined there, lets down her hair.
Which was red.
Yeah. The handsome prince. What's that?
Jack and the Beanstalk.
Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack climbs the beanstalk to get to some city in heaven where he finds a person playing a harp, a golden goose, which is the same as the great winged eagle in the Egyptian tradition. You have to read it, folks, to understand it. I'm telling you. I'm exposing you to things that take a lot of work. Pardon me. Speaking of work, getting down there is getting more difficult all the time. Yes?
Do Native Americans have any traditions about this kind of stuff?
Sure. As a matter of fact, not just Native Americans, the Polynesians, the Orientals, the people from Asia, Africa, all of them have the Mars is always the cultural hero. Venus is always the goddess. Snow White and the 7 dwarfs, the same number of 7 that you see in John Revelation over and over and over again. You see the serpents in the head, the snakes in the Hindu tradition. You see the 7 serpents from the Greek and the Roman tradition. From the Aztec and Maya, the snakes coming out of the head, 7, always 7. Because these were plasmas that were seen in the heavens. All unifying symbols. That's what makes it so interesting. We've got a question here.
Yeah, Genesis 28, it speaks of Jacob's having the dream, he dreamed and beheld the ladder set upon the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven, and behold, the angels of God ascending and descending upon it.
That's Jacob's ladder. That is the stairway to heaven. And let me just clue you in. We're about to finish, aren't we? When you go through your temple ordinances, you could go into the temple and take out your endowments in about 10 or 15 minutes time and leave. The rest of it is called an ascension. Well, I should write it here. Today, we sit in one room and they change the light level and before you go through the veil into the celestial room, and that's it. But in the original temple, you went from the garden to the creation room, to the terrestrial room, and to the celestial room. And each time you ascended, you did it by going up a spiral staircase. The same image that the Native American traditions call the chain of arrows, or the backbone of God. Every ancient culture has the same story. Mars is the hero. Venus is his mother, who bears him in an immaculate conception. Does any of this sound familiar? She's also his consort. He is married in a ritual the ancients called the Hieros Gamos, Greek temple marriage. Hieros Gamos. And Saturn is the creator or the father. He's the one that makes it all happen. He creates himself out of the chaos that they saw in the heavens, which are the waters above and below the firmament in our Genesis account. So every culture everywhere has exactly the same story. It's just told in different terms because they remembered it differently. But it's the one story. Yes?
I was just going to say the Indian's headdress is after the,
the war bonnet.
Crown that Venus wore.
The war bonnet. Yeah. Yes?
I also think it's important to point out with these three planets on a shish kebab, so to speak, that when planets first form, they are formed in a plasma pinch. So the very act of creating a planet follows this line, doesn't it?
It does. That's every world that has ever been created was created this way, not just, we're not a one-off creation like we like to think of ourselves.
And then they eventually are drawn away by a sun or some other body and become...
Interactions eventually disrupt this arrangement, and the planets assume normal orbits.
It wasn't the whole Earth. I mean, maybe on my own theory or what I understand, but this whole Earth landed here from the fall. There's no way that this Earth is in this place in the motion that it's in now.
You're partially
and
correct.
it will go back.
Yeah.
And the firmament was encased in water, the birth, symbolic of the birth, of being born again, and that's what protected it from the fiery darts and everything. As the fall took place, it was thrust an arm's length from Kolob, and it landed here, or interaction with other planets. But eventually, this won't be its nesting place. It will go back to Kolob. So this is just a temporary, and man's ideas that crisscrossings and everything. So
what you're describing is what Brigham Young said. I include this in my third lesson online, and I show that among other statements by early general authorities, things they learned from Joseph Smith that make no sense in the standard history of our planet. They only make sense in this scenario.
yeah, so apparently planets move in and out at different cycles, and we're at the. I mean, if you understand the universe and solar system and galaxy, we're extended way far away, and we're seeing just bits and drops of it.
Well, consider this. Nibley identified the word kolob as having something to do with heart. The Semitic word for star, as Joseph Smith correctly identified it, was kakab or kokab, which means star. And he wrote them ha-kokabim in his description of the Egyptian papyri. Ha is an Egyptian determinative, meaning the. Im is a plural ending, like our S. So ha-kokab-im means the stars, which is precisely what Joseph Smith said that meant, the stars. A variation of kakab is kolob, having partly the meaning of heart and partly the meaning of star. Kolob is heart star. It is this planet that was the eye of God, was also the heart of God. In the Egyptian tradition, it was the two-part eye of God. Kolob isn't some distant place in our galaxy or in another galaxy. It's right here in our neighborhood. It was when earth was near heaven, when it was near the throne of God, as Brigham Young said. And it fell from that position. And the whole terminology about the fall derives from that one event that happened near the end of the patriarchal age, just before the flood. But you got to go through all of the lessons, you got to do the homework in order to understand how that all fits together. If you don't, you're going to be stuck in the same mode that the rest of Christianity is where prophetic metaphor is concerned. You'll never be able to make hide nor hair of it. You'll never be able to make sense of it. I know that sounds like a sweeping statement. Don't know how else to say it except right out. If you don't understand cosmology, the correct cosmology of our and history of our earth, then you'll never understand prophecy. Any other questions, or can we call it good there? One more.
What about on the south polar configuration? Is there anything?
No. It appears, and of course we don't know. There were no astronomers in those days. These people were reporting things as best they understood them in the heavens. That's why this, with the symbol in the middle, could be seen as an eye, or it could be seen, I want to talk about ascension too. It could be seen as the axle of, is that right? L-E? No, E-L, that's right. Axle of a wheel. It could be seen as a heart, a two-chamber heart. It could be seen as a breast. You wonder why the medieval artists always depicted their goddesses bare-chested? Because that was their symbol. You see Isis holding the Ankh, that's her symbol. You see the Roman god Janus holding the wheel, that was his symbol. You see Pharaoh with the white crown and the red crown, those were his symbols. Why? Because those were symbols that had been seen in the heavens. They were seen as symbols of authority. So one image in the heavens could become several things. Does that clarify that a bit? And I wanted to say this about ascension. I started to, and then I sidetracked myself. When you go through the temple, you are actually in the original, when you go to the Salt Lake Temple, for example, where there are actors and you still move from room to room, you're going through an ascension experience. You go up from room to room, up a stairway. They used to use the circular stairways in the corners because they're indicative of Jacob's ladder. Who mentioned Jacob's ladder? Chris, that's right. They're indicative of Jacob's ladder. So they were part of the ritual. We don't use them anymore. In fact, we have a little chain across the, tell me, Steve, I haven't been there for a while. The little chain across the stairway with a little sign that says, please use the stairway? Isn't that what they have? Yeah. Because we don't understand the role. It's an ascension experience. Every prophet, probably the best example is Nephi in the Book of Mormon. Thank goodness for the Book of Mormon. Nephi said, I was carried up to an exceedingly high mountain, higher than any other mountain I've ever seen. He's describing an ascension experience. He's describing ascending the ladder that Jacob saw in his vision. And when you go through the temple, you are experiencing vicariously the vision of a prophet. You're experiencing it in ritual. You are moving up this ladder to the celestial kingdom. And if you don't believe me, next time you're in the Salt Lake Temple and you're in the celestial room, look up over the veil and you will see standing there a woman. And behind her is a scalloped shell. Why is there a woman?
It's Venus.
She's Venus. She's Aphrodite, to be specific. Aphrodite's tradition is Venus's tradition, and the scalloped shell is her symbol. It's on the doorknobs of the temple, the same symbol. There's the beehive, and beneath it is Aphrodite's shell. Okay? Because she was part of Mars' ascension experience. All the ancients knew that. We're the ones that don't know that, but it's preserved in our temple. She is the veil. That's why she's over the veil. She is the one that covered the heavens. It's a ritual, folks. It's meant to teach us something about our ancient heavens. Everything you see, everything you say, everything you do, and everything you wear in the temple is about this. From the garden to the celestial room, from the washings and anointings to temple marriage, it's all about this. And we don't know that. We think they are some mystical, sacred rituals that were revealed to Joseph Smith. It's history, folks. It's history. And we are meant to understand that. And the promise is this, and I repeated this many times in the lessons. What are all the promises that are made in the temple? Steve here goes regularly. I admire him for his determination and his dedication. He even does repair work in the temple. So let me just tell you, or ask you, what is it? What was I going to ask?
Promises, but I don't know if we should discuss those.
Well, no, that's nothing. There's nothing. The church has a model of the temple and the visitor center where all of this is plainly on display. I'm not talking about something that's sacred. But, I'm going to ask you, Steve, what is the promise then that we're made in the temple? If we live righteously, what will happen?
We'll eventually die.
Don't write, Steve. Don't call me. Okay, right, Steve.
No, we will inherit all that the Father has. We'll become gods and goddesses.
Correct. Exactly. The implicit message that is not spoken and not explained, just like the rituals that we go through, is that if we will live righteously, one of those blessings is we will see in vision exactly the same thing the prophets saw. All the prophets saw the same vision, as I said earlier. That was not hyperbole. It's that important. God considers it that important that it is always part of the prophet's vision. And we experience it. We walk in the footsteps of the prophets when we go through the temple, of the prophet's vision, and we have no idea what a boon we are being given. And the only way you can recognize that is to know this history. Know why Joseph Smith drew that picture. Know why Velikovsky used the same two words to describe the planet of the Exodus, as Joseph Smith used to describe the agent of the latter-day destructions, the sign of the coming of Son of Man. Okay, next time we'll take up the second book in the trilogy, and we'll talk about some of the plagues. We'll be a little more specific. I don't do this to scare people. I don't do this to send you reeling. I do this so that you'll understand the scriptures. How you interpret it is up to you. But it is vital that you understand the scriptures. And I'm going to do the very best I can to help you understand that. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
So I don't